Now let's start with the Librescu story. Come on, how could that be selfish? The man gave his life. What could he possibly be getting out of that? So the egoist is clever. They're creative. They might start this explanation about how that was actually selfish by appealing to the idea that some fates are worse than death. What do you think? Do you think that there are some fates that are worse than death? I think I've heard people say that, and I think it's even a Harry Potter quote. You can let me know in the comments. Some fates are worse than death. Yeah, if you think about it, I think that has to be right. And I'll give you an example to prove it. Let's say an evil person captures you, a serial killer captures you, and they say, I'm going to give you two options. Option A is I'm going to kill you right now. And option B is, and then right before they say option B, she's like, I don't even need to hear option B. I'm going to take option B. I'll take anything other than being murdered right now. And that might sound right. Like, of course, option B has to be better. But then the serial killer says, oh, you haven't heard option B yet. You're not going to like option B. Option B is, I don't kill you right now. I'm going to keep you alive for one more week, and I'm going to torture you 24 hours a day for that week. I'm going to pull out your fingernails. I'm going to make you lie on hot coals. I'm going to waterboard you. I'm going to slowly cut off parts of your body, starting with your pinky toe or your pinky finger. I'm going to, capture your loved ones and slowly murder them one by one in front of your eyes. I'm just trying to think of the worst fates in life, right? Some fates are worse than death. And then after that week, then I'm going to kill you. And now you're thinking, oh my God. And so suppose, a lot of people, they hear this and they're like, well, I choose neither. I choose option C. Well, that would be great. But that's what philosophers love, these hypotheticals. We get to set them up any way we want. And in this hypothetical, there's no third option. You have to choose A or B. If you're me, I'd go with option A. I would take instant death. Because, who cares about living one more week when it's going to be filled with all that torture? And if that's the way to go, then we just proved that some fates are worse than death. And so what the egoists will do is they'll say that Librescu sacrificing his life is preferable, is better. Even if he is as selfish as they come, he would choose that over any alternative. Now, this is where we have to reach a little bit, and we have to stretch the imagination, and this is going to sound pretty rigged and pretty contrived. But we can at least imagine some fates for Librescu where he survives the Virginia Tech shooting and his life is actually worse. Take survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt is a real thing, and people can lose their minds over it. There are many people who come back from war, say the Vietnam War, where they survived, but their buddies, their fellow soldiers, the people that they became so close with, they don't make it back. And you might say, well, okay, hey, you had to go through hell and back. You had to go to war, but look, you survived. Isn't that something? And the person is just tortured by their guilt. Again, this is kind of randomness. Like, why did I, it's like they're walking through a minefield and their buddy next to them, their friend next to them, just happened to step on a mine and got blown up right in front of their eyes, and they made it through the minefield. And it just seemed totally, totally random. And the guilt from that might riddle them so much that they get suicidal. And then maybe they come back to the United States, and after a year or two, they commit suicide from the trauma of that. So maybe that fate was worse than death in the war. And maybe we could say something similar of Librescu, that he would have such survivor's guilt that it would lead him to suicide, and that it would have been better for him just to die in that moment, avoid all the survivor's guilt. So if we think of this is maybe not the kind of a morbid way to think through this, but if you imagine life to be like a board game, and you're not trying to play it like a moral person, you're just trying to play it like a selfish person who wants to maximize pleasure and avoid pain for yourself as the player, and you get to choose the path of Librescu, and path 1 is you barricade the door, you protect your students, and option 2 is that you survive, but a lot of your students die, and then sometime after a week, a month, a year, you commit suicide. If that were the board game, you probably would choose the path of self-sacrifice. So it might look like it was altruistic, but it's actually selfish. And the egoist will claim that they can play this game irrespective, regardless of what perfect example you give them. They'll say, give me your best example of altruism and I'll shoot it down. And we started with Librescu. That's pretty darn good. And we can play this game with the other examples too. So the couple that I mentioned, the professor, the environmental studies or science professor, that seems like a sacrifice. They really wanted kids of their own, and they didn't have them because they did it for the environment, for the planet. And how could you paint that as selfish? Well, maybe they just really enjoy telling people that, like they told me that. So they probably tell a lot of people that. So it's not just their students. They might at dinner parties, maybe there's some award that they're eyeing, like greenest person in the world. And they get so much joy out of that it's worth it for them. And so they're not doing it for the planet. They're really doing it for themselves. And charitable donations. What if someone's doing it for the tax write-off? So it's not really about helping people. That's okay. But, they're doing it because they get such a huge tax write-off that it makes their lives much better. And so they really were just doing it for them. Okay, what about just helping people in general? So to explain how that can be selfish, let me give a specific case. We'll call this the hunter-gatherer case, or the hunter-gatherer A, hunter-gatherer B example. So imagine there are two hunter-gatherers. They're living tens of thousands of years ago. And they need to hunt and gather 10 pounds of food a week to survive. If they get less than that, then it's only going to be a matter of time before they die. Suppose that hunter A, on average, collects 12 pounds of food per week, and hunter-gatherer B collects 9 pounds per week. So in that model, what's going to happen? What's going to happen in that model? Well, person B, after not long, is going to not make it, right? They're going to be short. They're going to be hungry after 1 week, even hungrier after 2. And remember, 9 is the average, so they might have some weeks where they only get 6 or 7. Yeah, they might have some good weeks, but after enough time, after enough bad weeks in a row, they're probably going to be a goner. And even A, they'll be able to survive longer, but if they have a string of too many bad weeks, even if your average is 12, you might have some 9, 8, 7 pounds a week weeks, and especially if it's an extra bad winter, you might not make it. So B's definitely going to die, and A could live, but it's a little bit of a crapshoot. Let's say that these hunter-gatherers are just straight up selfish. Straight up selfish. then you would think they're never going to help each other. They're never, so if they're straight up egoist, straight up selfish, then hunter-gatherer A is never going to give some of their food to B and vice versa. They're never going to help each other in any way. Well, even the egoist can explain how them working together, them helping each other, they could easily explain how actually that's selfish. We can explain how people working together and cooperating is actually selfish. It's easy. Suppose that so we know that if they go it alone, A gathers 12 pounds, B gathers 9 pounds. So you add that up, you get 21 pounds per week. But suppose if they work together, they hunt together, they're more efficient. And so together, they can hunt and gather more collectively than if they do it alone. Because they're more efficient. So you don't just add up the 9 and the 12, you have to factor in the efficiency factor, the efficiency bonus. And suppose that together, when they work together, instead of 21 pounds, when you add up them individually, you get 30 pounds because of the efficiency. And so when you divide that by 2, that's 15 pounds, and that's plenty. That's a surplus, and then both can survive. So it's definitely in B's interest, if they're going to be super selfish, to work with A. But A is probably going to do it too, out of selfishness, even if they're totally selfish, because they probably will live longer than if they go it alone. Yeah, they'll get 12 a week, but it's a risk, because if they work together, they get 15. So helping is actually better. Even if all you care about is yourself, even if you don't really care about B, you're still going to work together because that's what's best for you. So actually, that was selfish. So that's what the egoist is going to do. Just keep playing that game. And you might be thinking, there's something very sneaky about this. There's something about this tactic. It's actually very, very difficult. I ask students this all the time, and they say, there's like a trick here. What do you mean you could really play this game no matter what? Well, what if you fail? It's like, well, you haven't been creative enough. And what you could say something like, okay, maybe in some of these cases, you could explain how actually it's selfish. Maybe sometimes. But there's got to be at least one case where the game fails, right? And what the egoist can say is, you at least have to admit that it's possible that they're acting selfishly. And that is very irritating to the proponent of altruism, because the altruist kind of wants to say that at least in one case, it's impossible that they're being selfish. And it seems like the egoist has them between a rock and a hard place. I don't know if the altruist can say that. That's a bit too strong. So here's one way to respond to this sneaky, this almost like logical sleight of hand, or this philosophical sleight of hand tactic. You can use the same tactic, use the same strategy back against the egoist and say, okay, if you're going to play this game, that seems to be because there's no way to disprove it. People that are in other fields or in logic, they'll say this idea is unfalsifiable. So if you've ever looked at philosophy of science or some other related fields, they talk about how good theories need to be falsifiable. They don't need to be false, but there at least needs to be a way in theory to disprove them. Otherwise, they're alongside all theories that are unfalsifiable. And a lot of those seem to be really wacky, So if I said something like, there are goblins living in your closet. And you might say, look, no, they're not. And you might say, oh, well, when you go look, they hide. Okay, you're like, okay, well, they hide, and then you really look around. No, they're smarter than that. They know when you're looking, and they can go invisible whenever you look. There's no way to disprove that. So you might say, well, that's a crazy unfalsifiable one. And this actually, that selfish theory, that's different. That one's a sensible one. But how do you differentiate the sensible ones from the not sensible ones? It's actually very, very difficult. So instead of trying to do that, why don't we use their own game against them? So remember, the egoists, the game they're playing is the actually that selfish game. So let's reverse it. Let's use it against them. We're going to put the egoist on the defense. We're going to play offense. And we're going to say, oh, okay, you said that I tried to come up with examples of altruism, and you said that, nope, everything is egoism, everything is selfish. And so I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to take your view. You're saying everything is selfish. And not only am I going to I'm not just going to try to disprove that by giving you one example of something that's not selfish. I'm going to do you one better. And I'm going to go so far as to say is not only is there some or many acts of altruism, acts that aren't selfish, I'm going to say everything is altruism. So instead of the actually that's selfish, I'm going to say actually that's altruism. You did that game. What's to stop me from doing that game? And I'm going to do it. So this is how we're going to show the defect in the egoist strategy. We're going to use their own tactic against them. So instead of just saying that some altruism exists, let's say it's everywhere. It's rampant. It's ubiquitous. All human acts are altruistic. Now the egoist is on defense. The egoist is going to say, that's crazy. I give you all sorts of examples that are selfish. And then whenever they try to do that, whenever there are cases where it seems like there might be selfishness, or it seems obvious that there is, you provide an explanation for how actually, at the end of the day, it's altruistic. And the more plausible, the better. So let's practice. Again, the back and forth goes like this. The egoist says, everything's selfish. And then the altruist says, no, you're wrong. And the egoist says, I can give you plenty of examples of selfishness. And the altruist says, bring it on. And the egoist says, okay, how about this? You're driving to the store. You're in the parking lot. It's packed. You don't have a lot of time. You're looking for a spot. You're circling around. You don't see any. And then finally in the distance, you think you see one. You pull up. And you were wrong. It looked like there was a spot, but really it's just a car that's parked sideways and they're taking up 2 spots. So from afar, it looked like there were 2 spots. When you go in, your car won't fit there. And maybe it's one of those people who seem to be arrogant and selfish, and maybe they have kind of a fancy car, or maybe it's not as fancy as they think, but they're parking it kind of sideways so that no one can park next to them and maybe potentially chip their door when opening it. They have some fancy sports car or something. And you might say, what a prick. I hate people like that, taking up 2 parking spots. And the egoist says, see? That's just one tiny example, but that's just a small example. Look, that's egoism. That's selfishness. And now as altruists, or, at least we're wearing the hat of an altruist, we're going to say, that's actually, that looks selfish, but it's actually not. What do you mean? How could that be? How could that be for my benefit? Well, think of an explanation. The more plausible, the better. Be creative. It's kind of fun. Maybe there was glass or nails or tacks in that spot, and so the person wanted to stop anyone from getting their tires ruined. Or, I don't know, maybe the person knew that you need to get your steps in. You need to be a little healthier. I mean, this is really a reach. This is a stretch. And so they're making you park farther away for your own benefit to be healthier. I mean, you get crazy. You could say, what if there's a mine underneath that spot? In this way, and it's like a Tom Cruise Mission Impossible type person, or just like a SWAT team, and so they park their car there, and there's not enough time to like put up a sign for whatever reason, and they saved you from stepping on a landmine. So it was actually for your benefit. Okay, let's do a couple more examples. The altruist says, "Hey, everything's altruistic." Egoist says, "No, plenty of selfishness in the world. What if someone came into the classroom and robbed us all at gunpoint? Wearing a ski mask and has a big garbage bag, and they go one by one. They collect everyone's valuables and phones and purses and wallets and cash, and they rob us. Look, that was very selfish. That didn't help us out. Actually, that was altruism," we say. "How could robbing me be for my benefit?" Well, be creative, right? What if it was to teach you a lesson about being materialistic? What if it was like a Robin Hood type scenario where they take from us? Some of us might be well off. Some of us maybe a little bit, not so middle class, but we're still Americans in the 21st century. And there's lots of people in the world that are worse off than us. And so let's say the person is selling all the valuables and then giving the money to people who really need it, like dying children in some third world country. So it was actually altruism. And then finally, this case with a Seinfeld character, George Costanza. There's this great episode, so I'll try to insert it here.
Bozo?
No.
B-O-Z-O.
Sorry.
You've never heard of Bozo the Clown?
No.
How could you not know who Bozo the Clown is?
I don't know. I just don't.
How can you call yourself a clown and not know who Bozo is?
Hey, man. What are you hassling me for? This is just a gig. It's not my life. I don't know who Bozo is. What, is he a clown?
What, is he a clown? What, are you kidding me?
Well, what is he?
Yes, he's a clown.
All right, so what's the big deal? There's millions of clowns.
All right, just forget it.
Forget me? You should forget it. You're living in the past, man. You hung up on some clown from the 60s, man.
Oh. Very good, very good. All right, go fold your little balloon animals, Eric. Eric. What kind of name is that for a clown, huh?
Excuse me, you must be George. I'm Robin's mother. Oh, you seem like such a lovely young man.
Well, I do what I can.
Hi, Ma. How's everything?
Oh, this is just a wonderful party.
Burgers should be ready in a minute.
Oh, great, great.
Oh,
What's that smell? Smoke? Smoke? Everybody, I think I smell some smoke back here. There was an inferno in there! An inferno! There he is! That's him!
the coward that left us
I was trying to lead the way. We needed a leader, someone to lead the way to safety.
But you yelled, "Get out of my way."
Because, as the leader, if I die, then all hope is lost. Who would lead? The clown? Instead of castigating me, you should all be thanking me. What kind of a topsy-turvy world do we live in where heroes are cast as villains, brave men as cowards?
But I saw you push the women and children out of the way in a mad panic. I saw you knock them down. And when you ran out, you left everyone behind.
Seemingly. To the untrained eye, I can fully understand how you got that impression. What looked like pushing, what looked like knocking down, was a safety precaution. In a fire, you stay close to the ground, am I right? And when I ran out that door, I was not leaving anyone behind. Oh, quite the contrary. I risked my life making sure that exit was clear. Any other questions?
How do you live with yourself?
It's not easy.
Classic George, he seems to be thinking only about himself. And there's a fire at this kid's birthday party, and instead of, escorting the children and the elderly out first and making sure they get out safe, he pushes people down, pushes kids down. They're screaming, pushes the woman with the walker, and just makes sure he gets out. Like, the egoist says, look, classic selfishness. There you go. You're saying that everything's altruistic. No, that lots of stuff is selfish, especially that. And you can see at the end of the little clip, he plays this game quite well. He's like, oh, what looked like pushing and shoving was actually gentle nudging in a fire. People need to be down at the ground below the smoke level. I got out first because we needed someone to lead. Without a leader, where would we be in this world? What kind of topsy-turvy world is this where people like me are painted as villains? We should be heroes. I was acting for you. Obviously, we think that he's lying, but the altruist can always say, no, he wasn't. So it's an interesting tactic, but it's got to be defective because you can use it in both directions. So at best, we have defeated the egoist in using this move. And at worst, at the very least, we at least have neutralized this move. So their move only works as much as our move works back on it. And so they end up kind of offsetting each other or canceling each other out. All right, and finally, let's look at some other problems for egoism. The egoist says everything is selfish. Everything is ultimately selfish. But even if we admit that, don't we need, for practicality's sake, just to kind of navigate this world, don't we need to distinguish between different levels of selfishness? So if we're forced to say that everything is selfish, don't we need different categories of it? So for example, the person coming in to rob the class versus someone coming in, and helping all the students in the class. Even if stealing and sharing, if we're forced to call them both selfish, isn't sharing in a different category? We could at least say there's things that are, what about the things that at least involve helping others indirectly? Fine, that's ultimately selfish, but now there's so much just semantic. Okay, I guess under your definition, it's selfish. But why not just call that selflessness? Helping and exploiting. Same thing. Even if we're forced to say that helping is selfish and exploiting is selfish, why don't we just, at least for its name, even if in some cosmic ultimate sense it is selfish, at least for when we interact with each other and as we name things, just for again, practicality's sake, pragmatic sake, just as maybe we're just stipulating, we'll just put that in a special category. It seems to be in a different category than helping. Remember the peeping Tom problem that utilitarian faced. That would still be a problem here. So how does that one go again? Well, a peeping Tom is someone who spies on someone getting dressed or undressed. But in this example, the person is so stealth about it that they never get caught. that seems, even if you don't get caught spying, there still seems something icky about it. And utilitarian, it would be hard for them to explain what's wrong with it because there's no loss of utility. And an egoist would too. Intuition is that it's still wrong even if you don't get caught. But the egoist doesn't seem like they can explain why, because the act was ultimately self-interested. Couldn't we rank charitable donations? Are all charitable donations equal? So if someone gives to a charity that saves children who are starving or dying of preventable diseases, isn't that a better charitable donation than if somebody who's really into opera donates money to an opera house that needs a new roof? A lot of people would agree with that, but the egoist doesn't have an explanation for that because both are ultimately self-interested, and so they both would be morally acceptable if that were the preference of the individual. This is a challenge to psychological egoism from a thinker named Kavka, not Kafka, but Kavka. The egoist says everything is selfish, but that makes us like robots. That's like a logical claim. Even this is a claim about physical, biological beings. And in nature, there can be even natural kinds where you can have exceptions. So human beings have 2 legs. That seems to be kind of a universal truth, but there can be exceptions. People could be born without a leg. All crows are black. And there's probably an albino crow out there, but it's still kind of a general rule. So the exception almost kind of confirms the rule because it's such a minor exception. So even to make it a logical claim that necessarily human beings are selfish, that might be too strong. So maybe make it an inductive one that's more akin to scientific inductive generalizations where they don't have to be so absolute. So instead of logical egoism, maybe we could call it natural egoism or predominant egoism. Think about DNA replication. In your biology classes, you learn that DNA replicates itself at an alarming rate. There's a little squirrel outside my window. Sorry, I got distracted. And it is very accurate, but still 1 out of whatever a million times, whatever it is, it messes up. And so we're not as perfect as DNA replication. So even if we are kind of driven towards selfishness, again, we don't, for the sake of argument, we'll admit that a lot of us won't think that, but if for the sake of argument we do. But aren't we fallible? Can't we mess up sometimes? So instead of saying we always do it, why not just say like the vast majority of the time? So we might call that predominant egoism. And then finally, there might be a logical inconsistency to ethical egoism. Take this kind of funny case. Say you're going to some sporting event, some arena event, like a baseball game, a basketball game, a football game, or it could be a concert. So if you're not into sports, think about your favorite artist that you'd want to see. And the venue is sold out. There's 1 ticket left. There's 1 seat left. And 2 people want to go. Let's say we go with egoism. Let's say the egoist is right for the sake of argument. What does the theory say ought to be done? Well, the theory says do what is ultimately in your best interest. All actions are not that the descriptive view is they are ultimately self-interested, and then the normative view is that they ought to be. So what ought to be done is whatever is in the individual's best interest. But if there's 2 people, they have conflicting best interests. So what's the answer? Doesn't seem like there is one. From the first person's perspective, if they follow egoism to the T, then it will tell them that they should get the ticket. Because the theory says do what's ultimately in your best interest, and you getting the last seat would be in your best interest. But that would mean, logically, that the other person is not getting the ticket. So the theory says the first person should get the ticket and not the second person. But from the second person's perspective, it says the opposite. It says that the first person shouldn't get the ticket and the second person should. And that's a contradiction. The theory is prescribing at the same time that the first person should and should not get the ticket, and it's also saying that the second person ought to and ought not get the ticket. That makes no sense. So there might be a logical problem for the egoist. All right. That was a lot of fun. As always, thanks for hanging out with me.